is that way.
It's said, you know, except she can't stop. But she said,
Okay, let's start. Hi everybody, thanks for coming. My name is Marcus Miller. I'm the director here at the Gordon Snelgrove Gallery. And I want to acknowledge that we're on Treaty 6 territory, homeland of Métis as well. I'm really happy to be introducing Lezli Rubin-Kunda here. God, already. It's okay. Lezli Rubin-Kunda, who's been here a number of occasions working with some of our luminaries, local luminaries here, including Ellen Moffat and Susan Shantz here. They're going to be, Susan, do you want to say a few words after I'm finished here about the show that's coming up? Sure. But I'll certainly mention it. The show Shedding is opening next Thursday at AKA, and Lezli and Susan are collaborating on this show. And there's also a work of art from the 1980s by Honor Cheever here in the show. And we're all excited to see what happens to that work, what Susan and Lezli do to that work. So, but I'm just going to say a few words about Lezli here. She's been all over the world, and she's got an extensive CV. I'll just mention a few of the things that she's been up to. In 1976, she graduated in interdisciplinary studies at U of T in Toronto, and she went on to art school in Boston, receiving her MFA at the School of the Museum of Fine Arts at Tufts University in Boston. And I noticed that you had a number of shows in Boston as well, of course. She's been all over the world exhibiting and performing. She's currently a senior adjunct lecturer in the Faculty of Architecture and Urban Planning at the Technion University in Haifa, Israel, where she teaches basic, advanced, multidisciplinary courses in drawing, environmental art. Drawing is kind of a central theme in your work, yes? Drawing and perhaps walking, could I say that as well? I noticed many performances here. One here I've got in 2017, recently, Line Made by Walking Through Petals, which was a 50-year tribute to Richard Long's Line Made by Walking. So that was a live performance in Israel. She was, another piece is Drawing and Blurring Lines on a Brick Wall at the Draw to Perform Symposium at Crow's Nest Gallery in London, England. At the Katzman Gallery in Toronto, same year, 2016, she did a piece called Marking the Passing of a Day, which was a 24-hour durational drawing. The year before that, she did a piece called Fragments of Knowledge at the Janko Data Museum in Eidhad, Israel. Is that data as in Dadaism?
Yes.
Yes, good. Teaching me to write in Arabic, an interactive performance. At the at Urban Interventions in Haifa, Israel. She's, as I mentioned before, she's collaborated on several occasions with Ellen Moffat. She's shown in Portugal, Spain, Germany. The list goes on, and I will stop and I'll just hand it over to you, Lezli. Oh, excuse me, did you want to say anything about the show, Susan?
Well, yeah, Lezli and I are going to be collaborating at AKA over the next week to sort out what we're doing. So Leslie's a bit more spontaneous performance-based than me. I'm a bit more of an organizer. So it'll be an interesting challenge. And we wanted to do that in the context of honors work and a little bit of our previous work that each of us will have. But we will be finding out what is going to evolve over the next week or so, and hope you can come to the opening. And the show will be up till about mid-April. And there'll be some reflective text by Joan Borthwick, who I think is right behind me.
He's currently reflecting.
Yeah, currently reflecting. I'll be reflecting. So yeah, happy to mention that and hope you can come out.
One last thing, this is also a book launch. You're going to show us the book here, and you can get your signed copy after the talk.
How much is the book? It's 20.
Okay.
Right, I mean, in the stores it's 30, but I thought 20 is a good thing to have. So yes, please buy them because otherwise I'll have to drag my order back to Israel because I'm going straight from Saskatoon to Israel. So I need a
We have a direct flight, Saskatoon
No, no.
to... Fantastic.
Yes, we do.
Yes.
No,
All our
it's definitely
direct flights.
Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go quickly, so I'll cover it all and let you out so we can also get the book and also back to your classes and everything. And I wanted to stand here so I include everybody, so I hope it's going to work technically, holding and doing. Anyway, so I'm going to just start with this work that I did in Tel Aviv. It's called Reforestation. And it was part of a project called Homesick in a old building of studios in downtown Tel Aviv on a street called Herzl Street. And I was asked to do some kind of installation or intervention or something. And when I came into the old building, all the cracks in the walls reminded me so much of the lakes and river maps of Northern Ontario that where we used to go canoe tripping all the time. So I filled in all the cracks with blue, and then I projected an image from Temagami country in Northern Ontario, and I had loons calling through the halls there. And then I started planting these trees because, of course, in Israel, the wilderness is very different. There is no wilderness per se. I mean, there's the desert, but they plant a lot of trees, sort of very organized and purposeful. And so I was trying to somehow in this project fuse the two places that I considered home. So I want to just talk about the book, but in order to talk about the book, I have to talk about myself first, because I'm the writer of the book, and it turns out it's a lot about me because it is. Because I felt that in order to talk to people, I had to position myself and figure out what I wanted to know and why. And so I'll just start by saying I was born in Toronto and grew up there. And my kind of two polar opposites that I was working within was the Holocaust and the wilderness. Because I grew up in this very sort of tight Jewish community there. And people had just come out of the Holocaust, a lot of my friends' parents, and I went to a Jewish day school, and so we had like a lot of heavy Holocaustic awareness, I guess. And and at the same time I was in Toronto in the 50s and 60s, and it was all very, well, sort of rosy. I mean, there was a nuclear bomb threatening us from afar, but there was this kind of rosy thing. And then in the summers we would get shipped off to these summer camps, beautiful Northern Ontario summer camps, and spend 2 months there in the wilderness, canoeing and swimming and hiking. So I was always kind of torn between those two, and at a certain point after university, after high school, I moved out west, and I had a sense that maybe I could just sort of leave my history and all that cultural stuff that it was like a baggage in a way, and I could just live on the land. Of course, at that time, we weren't aware in any way of the fact that someone else had been living on the land. So it's like, oh, you can just get a lake and live on a lake, and this is great. I just felt, but still I felt that although I wasn't aware of the Aboriginals, inhabiting, I was aware of somehow some other that wasn't mine. Maybe it was the original, Anglo-Saxon settlers, or so at a certain point I decided to go to Israel, which, while I was growing up was this sort of faraway place where somehow we were redeeming our history by building up anew, and orange groves and all kinds of partly mythological and ideological things. And I thought it would be interesting to just find out how it is to live in a place where the culture is sort of majority culture would be my own, and the language would be something that I'd learned in Hebrew school. Anyway, I came there, and I just want to read you a passage from here. In my mid-20s, I decided to move to Israel in search of that at-home feeling I was looking for. And in some ways, I did find it. Being part of the mainstream culture with the familiarity of its holidays, rituals, and biblical place names was indeed a kind of return. But in other ways, the move only magnified the insurmountable problems of belonging, of finding home. On a political and historical level, the land was already populated by others, and the return home was accompanied by their dispossession. The rights of ownership and belonging are constantly debated, challenged, struggled over. I was often in a state of anxiety about the very survival of the country and of my own family. Not only was the culture other, the language different, and the political existence precarious and problematic, but so much was alien to me on the physical and material level. There was no seasons as I knew them, no real wilderness. Every centimeter of arable land had been inhabited, trodden on, and reclaimed. Except for the desert with its harsh beauty and spaciousness, the land for the most part was densely populated and cramped, dry and scruffy. The flora and everything else about the landscape so foreign that I felt alienated to my core. That old yearning did not subside. If anything, it was exacerbated. So I forgot to mention that sort of what was impelling me was something to do with this yearning to feel at home, feel like I belonged in the place where I was living. So I was looking, and when I left Toronto, I didn't really think about what I was leaving. I was leaving the language and the family and the seasons and the smells and all the familiar landmarks of, also physical or social. When I first came there, I was doing very abstract drawing. Actually, drawing was my sort of first love, and I was doing these very huge drawings of markings and erasings, and very non-contextual. They were just kind of metaphysical ones. And when I got to Israel, and eventually we moved into a house outside of Tel Aviv, and I had my 3 kids and got them organized and found work and sort of got myself situated in a way. I started to go back to my work, and my work changed radically, and it became much more about where I was living, and also reflected my domestic situation and also my garden and the neighborhood. And I was just walking around. Everything was new, all the pods and the seeds and the seasons and everything, and it's very rich vegetation there. So I was just, originally I started by just doing these installations, not installations, sort of objects, sculptural objects. This is sunflower seed shells, which in Israel they don't do it so much anymore, but they sit around and eat as they're talking, and they just spit it out, and then they have these huge piles of shells. So that was like a material that was also had been in other people's bodies, I guess, and it was very sort of familiar. So I made these blankets and all kinds of things. I'm going to just quickly go fast. This was a large installation in a museum that sort of culminated this whole period of doing these installations with materials. And I basically just brought a lot of materials that were around in my house, the flowers that had just fallen, plastic bags and earth, and some of the projects that I was working on already in my studio, these hanging blankets. And I just kind of organized them in different configurations within the space. And then I left for a couple of years to go to California to a sabbatical, and I just said, the museum asked me what should I do with that, and I just said, just toss it out. And I thought, oh, that's great. I love that feeling of like no baggage, and this is baggage again, but just making. And then I got more into just the making and not the final object when I got back to Israel, and I was just starting to connect, and I realized I don't really need a sculptural object or even an installation. I just want to be doing the activity and exploring the things around me in some kind of very, direct, visceral way. So I had my hands in the grapefruits, which look like jelly donuts, but they're not. They're rotting grapefruits that were in my yard. And they just kept falling and rotting. And so I felt I had to do something to organize them. Or these are called air roots, that are these roots that grow in the ficus tree. I think it's a rubber tree. And so I was weaving, and I did a lot of projects. So I just was taking the things and sort of putting them in front of me, and had the video. And so I did a whole long series of these things. And then eventually I had huge photographs and projected them. And, this one on the right is the thorns of a cactus tree from Israel, which is called a sabras. And it's very, I talk about this one because basically all the things, all the vegetation in Israel, it's so symbolic. You can't just take a plant and, dandelion or something and just play around with it. Probably here too, but there, everything had been claimed by somebody and had been sort of politically taken over. And so the suburbs was sort of very symbolic for the Palestinians. It's a plant that just grows up on all the borders of fields, and so they had taken it as a symbol, and then the Israelis had taken it as in a different direction. So I was wondering if I could just, come to the sort of fresh and see things without having all that baggage of loaded symbolism and just experience it on a one-to-one level. So that was kind of got me started in that. And, they did end up being symbolic, whether you want them or not. Somehow they become symbolic. But
What is the material on the left?
that's
The
red earth from my garden. It's a certain kind of earth called hamla, which is just incredibly, like you just throw a plant in and it grows. It's like Jack of the Beanstalk. It's very, very...
Leslie, do you want to say anything about the symbolism of the plant here?
about what it is to other people or what this work is?
What you were starting with, like the symbolism to the Palestinians, to the Israelis?
Right. Well,
and-
I was, like I said, I was trying to circumvent that. I was trying to not
Sorry.
deal with it.
Sorry.
Not take on all the things from there, because I felt like what I wanted to do was really try and feel connected to the place that I was. And so I thought the best way would be to just take it without all that previous stuff. And yeah, there's artists there that it's harder to do that if you're already infused with that. But I noticed, even though I was just playing, that very quickly a lot of symbolism came out. It's kind of like a halo or sort of
Border.
Jesus thing. Huh?
A border.
A border,
Yeah.
a puppet. Right. So it also had to do with going back to childhood activities and just sort of revisiting things that I played with, like mud, but in a context of performance. This is after I was exploring my neighborhood, I wanted to go out a bit to different places in Israel that I was interested in. This is in Tel Aviv. I took the sabras and I put them on. They're very, very spiky and dangerous. If you just, even if you don't touch it, if you just get near it, they like all these prickles get into your skin, and you can go for a week without being able to get them out. So I had like cardboard and all kinds of things on me, and I went. It was summer, and I dragged it through Tel Aviv from the City Hall Square, which was named Rabin Square after he had just been murdered there, and I walked down this boulevard and I went into the sea. So again, there's all this kind of symbolism there, which I was trying to ignore. But just what I liked about this project was it was just at the beginning of sort of global interventions where people were doing the same thing at the same time in different places. And so, while I was walking strangely through the boulevard, there were other people in all parts of the world, and then we projected it all together. It was in Ireland at a performance festival. So I found that really empowering. So you kind of feel like a strange creature doing these strange things. Although, as you see, nobody seemed to really care. No one was even looking at me. Whatever. Another sort of weird. But okay, this was. I'll talk about this project, and then I'll move on quickly. This was called Olive Grove, Backyard with Olive Grove, and I wanted to, investigate. I guess is the word. This was my partner's parents' backyard in a little town outside of Tel Aviv. And it had all these olive trees. Were quite old, and of course the olive trees had been part of an olive grove of a Palestinian village that had been there before whatever. And then before that, the Palestinian village was called after a Jewish village that had been there before the Palestinians. So it's very layered and complicated. I think complicated is the going word. So, there's all kinds of narratives that meet each other. And I was just thinking, okay, here I am. This is my yard. This is my backyard. What does that mean? This is, and, my partner's parents had come from Eastern Europe, and you know, and the Holocaust and all that, and then it came here. And so there were all these layers, and I just wanted to feel like this is somehow, I don't know what I was doing, but I just had this image of the red, of knitting around the tree, these red leaves, these red sleeves, and something like maybe protecting, possessing, mothering. Something about the knitting was also connecting me back with my mother, and you know, women's work. And so I went on and did many different things in the olive grove. This is chicken soup powder. They use it all the time there for cooking. You don't know how to make soup without using chicken soup powder, which is just really disgusting. Bright yellow stuff. So again, it was sort of smothering the tree, and you just put it on the tree and it just sticks. It's like glue. So eventually I had to brush it off, but I did all kinds of interventions, and I did. I stayed in the tree all night, and I tried swinging in the tree, and all this stuff I documented also. You know, if anyone's interested, I have like my website's pretty extensive because nobody saw this actually. It was just me doing it myself. So I was exploring this place, and I'll just read what I discovered. Although the house and yard appear in the videos and photographs to be solidly rooted in pastoral, this impression is mistaken. All around, massive redevelopment is taking place, transforming what had been a modest town into a suburb of ostentatious villas. Furthermore, I was creating these artworks during one of the periodic outbreaks of violence in the country. As I work in the olive grove, I feel the foundations shaking under my feet, literally as well as metaphorically. Now and then I hear explosions nearby. I find myself pondering questions of entitlement, ownership, history, and justice. Whose olive trees are these, anyway? Do we have a right to experience this yard as our own? And what does that even mean? The whole place is unsettling, filled with old ghosts and disturbing harbingers of change. I ask myself if time spent lovingly in a place creates a claim. Perhaps by becoming myself the subject matter, by simply being here at this site and working over time, I could get closer to an understanding and experience of its reality and contain, if not resolve, its contradictions and conflicts. I came to realize that presence and energy absorbed in a specific location, in interaction with its spaces and materials, did in fact create in me a deeper, if still tentative, feeling of belonging. So that's sort of how I developed my live practice, was just coming to a place and getting really involved in the specifics of materials and doing something active. So I'm just going to go really fast through these. Oh, I think we're going backwards. Yeah. Oh. Okay, this is another project. It was just this wall of an abandoned building in Jaffa, which is right next to Tel Aviv, and my son was living right next to it, so I kept passing it, and I just felt like I wanted to do something about it or with it. And anyway, in the end, I did a very simple, I just covered it all with charcoal. And then it was a non-wall. And I don't have an image, but on the other side of the wall, there was a lot of layers of wallpaper, and I started tracing. So drawing became like one of the ways in which I interacted with spaces. And I'm not going to talk about these, but just sort of little bits of various interactions and drawing projects. And some of them are live performances, some of them are part of festivals or symposiums, or some of them are just my own initiative, just going to a place. That's what I liked about them also, is you could just go to wherever you wanted and make your own project and then video it. And this was in Germany, in a military barracks that was being taken apart. Right on the border of Berlin. There's a group of Israelis and a group of Germans. Anyway, I came and did all these interventions in the space after hours when they closed up. And I just wanted to point out this angel making, which I brought flour to this really grotty sort of floor and made this angel. And the angel was this kind of metaphor of the kind of art that I thought I wanted to do, which was sort of like Richard Long's line made by walking, where you just come and you do something minimal but very embodied, and then you just leave it. And of course, when we were little, we didn't even photograph it, so that was really brave. And now I'm getting to that point again. I was just saying, I think to honor that I don't, yeah, maybe you don't have to photograph it, maybe you just do it. So, and then I came also to Canada and did a lot of projects in Canada where I was investigating my past here, but in the framework of performance. So I was sort of looking at it through engaging. This was on the West Coast for Western Front, and this is the place where I met Susan, which was Boreal. We had a month there with there was a Buddhist monk who was doing a mandala on top of the mountain there, and so I went around the whole property, which was lakes and forests, and I just did these temporary mandala forms, and then I left them. So with all that's left are these, little 30-second videos of them photographs. Okay, then I'll just leave this up for a minute. This is an image from one of the artists that I met, which I liked because it was sort of bridging the Middle Eastern kind of generic wrecked wall with, cement and then somehow fusing into the lakes. I felt like I wanted to reflect a bit about what I was doing and step back and see. I was wondering if how I had developed my practice was something, my own unique thing, or if it was related to maybe being a Canadian in a foreign place, or I just felt that I would like to hear what other artists were up to. So I made this proposal to go back to Canada and talk to Canadian artists, and I traveled all around the country and interviewed many artists. And actually, Amalie, I think she was going to come, but she didn't make it. She was one of the artists, and Susan, and all different people. I got them from all different ways. It was kind of a non-academic study in which I picked whoever appealed to me, and I researched online and came up with all the people. So what I want to do is just show you what I came up with, or I interviewed many people, and then I came up with a kind of framework of different orientations of different Canadian artists to their home or to the place where they live, or how they relate to that. It was kind of an open question. So we had long extended discussions about art and art making and how they got from one place to another. So there were a lot of different elements in it which weren't necessarily specifically about their home. But anyway, so I wanted to just outline the framework. I don't want to ruin the plot of the book, but I'll just give you a few examples of the kind of framework. This was part of the first chapter, which is called No Place Like Home. Artists who grow up, live, stay, and make work out of their own backyard or their home place. And there's the first artist, I don't know if any of you are familiar with him, Simon Frank, who lives in Hamilton. And he was like, if I didn't have my yard here, and if I didn't have this place where I live, I wouldn't be making art. It's like it's so fused with my place and with my childhood and with my memories and everything. It's sort of a vertical. He doesn't want to go anywhere. He just wants to explore further and further into his own place, which is Hamilton. This is Nicole Fournier. She's in a suburb of, used to be a small town outside of Montreal. And this is her yard. This is where she came back. She left for a bunch of years, came back, brought up her children here, and then she began this sort of, she doesn't like the word eco art, but she was rewilding her yard, and then she did something called live dining, in which she grew things on site and then invited people to come and dine. And she went on and did all kinds of live dining in different contexts. But this was the original place, and so she does a lot of performative actions. This is probably familiar with this. This is Amalie. This was relating to where you come from in a very deep way. In your landscape is the same landscape, but moving away so that you're not in your family home. So I think it gave her the freedom to maybe take it and transform it more into a myth or into a much wider sort of almost universalist concept. But it very much fuses the landscape with people of the place and with her own costumes and she designs, and here's another one. And, you know, in our discussion, she also discusses her background and her Mennonite past and the women and the orderly making things and giving them away and structuring things and how it influenced how she works. This is an Aboriginal artist called Tanya Harnett. She was, I met her in Lethbridge. She's moved since then, but her feeling or her strong position was that she has a home. She doesn't live there, but that is her place and her home and her tribe and her, you know, bloodline and a very different kind of connection to the land. And a lot of her art comes out of her identification with issues of Aboriginal land problems and abuse. This was a spill that happened in a northern Alberta lake, and she came there and found out where things were going wrong, where the dirt, or, you know, the gas or whatever was coming out into the creek, and she put this red dye. So she does a lot of sort of site interventions. This was another. There were a lot of Aboriginals, and then there were many non-Aboriginals who feel that their art is very much connected to the Aboriginal past, and they feel compelled to use that as the sort of engine. There was Sandra Semchuk, which I'm not going to talk about here, but she was very much, in her work, she does these text, sort of photo text things in which, you know, for sure the plants, nothing is neutral. It's all very confused with politics and history. You can't just look at a plant and say, oh, what a lovely plant. It's got this whole meaning to it. This was an artist from Winnipeg called Tim Schoten, and when he moved out to Winnipeg, he felt that he wanted to have this sort of one-man crusade going around to all the places where treaties were signed to the exact location, and then he does these in situ paintings with encaustic, so it's quite fast. And this is another artist, Marion Henner Bancroft. Also, one of her grandfathers had come from Scotland, I believe, and he was the principal of a residential school in Bertel, Manitoba. And she went back there, and you know, it's an abandoned site now. And somehow this image was really powerful to me because it looks like it could be anywhere in the world. It could be in Eastern Europe. It could be, you know, just places where there used to be something and they're gone. And she did a whole series of these sort of abandoned rocks, and you know, questioning what's her responsibility or how does she deal with it. So it seemed like a lot of the time the way of dealing with it was confronting it directly or through the art. The art was a vehicle for doing it. This is Lorraine Field. She's from Halifax, and this was an early work. She was from ceramics, and I sort of shifted into talking about women's work. And her work, she took little scraps of pottery and things that people had collected and brought from the old country to their new place, and she imposed them on the landscape and infused them. This was before Photoshop. She actually did somehow. She explained how she isolated it and photoed, and then photoed in the morning and the night, and so they were actually infused onto the rock. This is Susan Pence, Hibernaculum. So I meant to have the other slide too. It shows, Susan was talking about how influential originally her grandmother and her sort of her maternal ancestors and the way that they worked so much with craft and you know, in those days, of course, they didn't have a choice. It wasn't an art thing, it was a survival thing. But just that repetitive doing, often socially, you know, like the quilting bee and that kind of thing, that was influential for her when she began to make art. And realizing that those things, so in this work, you just see a part of it. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it goes around the whole gallery. It came out of her coming out to Saskatchewan and stacking. She had a piece of land that she was stacking with poles to use for firewood in this shack. And I think she says at some point that this was a kind of a way of situating herself. This piece helped her situate herself in this place. So it has something to do with this kind of repetitive, almost functional, but no longer functional. And I show this other very beautiful work of hers, Satiate. Again, there's a sort of formal, ritualistic quality to it. It also refers to these, I think, these bake sales in farm communities. And it's all these objects are covered with tomato paste, which has this strange kind of patina, almost like human organs, and then they're set up. And it's sort of, again, very labor intensive, and it's a kind of a paean to all these women, our ancestors, our maternal ancestors. This is a work by Aganetha Dyck. She tells a wonderful story here of how she began to work as an artist, laundry and shrinking sweaters, and she was a housewife, and then she began to work with laundry, and then she began to work with canning, and she was in a studio where she sort of inherited all these buttons. It was a button factory in downtown Winnipeg, and so she started to can the buttons into these jars, and then she discovered beeswax as a canning material. And anyway, in the end, she did these kind of human-animal collaborative works with the bees. She built kind of a hive around the objects, and then the bees went in there and started building parts of it. And so it was very collaborative and very site-specific, because she says that the bees were very sensitive, and the different flowers and the different beekeepers, and so she experimented a lot with different kinds of work. But I love this one because this object was in her studio when I went to visit her, and it's her grandmother's tablecloth that's somehow, become renewed through this artwork. Another artist, or another way maybe of orienting yourself to home, as this is an artist from Toronto called Stan Krzyzanowski. He just, again, it's a sort of he stayed in Toronto, but he has no interest in his past, no interest in going back to where he grew up or anything. He just, in the moment, where I am, I stop, I'm walking to work, I see something interesting, I take it, I photograph it, something like that, very here and now. If it doesn't happen now, it's not going to happen. And he also tells a story about how he got to that place of working. I think it's really interesting because, you see works of artists, and you don't really understand how it is that they didn't just jump into that. He evolved into this situation of just working. So what you're seeing here is he has a cottage, and he talks a lot about his work coming from the cottage. It's like while I'm doing maintenance work. So my best work is when I'm doing maintenance in the cottage, and then suddenly I see something. So he saw this pine cone opening or closing because of the wind, of the water and the moisture, and he's like, and he built this whole sort of scientific lab for opening and closing the pine cone, and then he built walls that were there breathing. Most of his work now is just, it's like time-based, or what do you call it?
Stop motion.
Yeah, stop motion. So he just, sees something, and he's just showing us stuff. And what's beautiful is also on his website, he's explaining how you can do this kind of thing. It's not like this secret thing I do and it's so great. It's like, if you want to do it, this is the techniques, and he has extensive websites explaining things. This is Victoria Stanton. She's an artist out of Montreal. She's sort of in the middle of the book where she doesn't relate to home as a place necessarily, but it's every place that she's ever lived. How do you keep moving around, but everywhere you go, connect yourself in a way that makes you feel comfortable? And she's developed a whole strategy, and of course it was an art strategy, so she would be taking videos and doing these walks and collecting things and doing map making, and those were her shows. The one on the right, she moves into more social sculpture kind of work, where she asks people this was in New Brunswick, and she asks people to take her on a walk to their favorite spot. So that's her way of connecting with the place and people. And she went on to do more of that kind of work. but this is a bit, that's one I see. This is a continuation of map making. For some reason, I guess a lot of artists are into map making and charting how they walked, and this was based on 5 years of walking with Sandra Semchuk. She does this mapping where she mapped, her way to the supermarket, to the thing, and walking her dog, and everything's charted. She did like a 5-year charting, and then she superimposed every day and created these maps, and later did these more sophisticated maps and maps with other people and asking other people about mapping. But there were a lot of mappers, and in fact, this was Alan Moffat and Kim Morgan doing a mapping project in Saskatoon. So it's some kind of, I feel like the mapping comes from a need to figure out where you are and connect, and then the sort of absurdity of changing your personal little, I think in this one they were charting their breathing, the rhythm of the breathing while they were walking. It also comes out of 50s psychogeography and this kind of thing, but as a way of locating maps. Okay, some artists are not interested at all in where they live and where they come from, and their inspiration or whatever comes suddenly out of the blue from somewhere else. And this was the case with Lorraine Field, who moved to Istanbul with her husband, and then she was taken to the Syrian desert, and she just felt she had a sort of epiphanal experience in which she felt, this is my place, or something very spiritual and everything. So she stayed there for many, many years until, of course, it became impossible, but did a lot of photographing and connecting to the locals. And, there's many questions about that, about the problem of, let's say, Western artists coming and studying more exotic cultures or whatever. And she got into some of that problem. But there's a few more. So it's usually her in the landscape, or her with her guide. Another woman who also left her beautiful home in Switzerland, and her name is Catherine Baudemer, and she moved to Montreal. And I just thought that was so funny, because we all think one would want to live in this beautiful landscape, and it's so orderly, and it's just great. But she couldn't stand the order, the culture, the cleanliness, the mountains, and she felt like this is beautiful to me. So, and she brought her friends to romp in this kind of post-apocalyptic. What time is it, by the way? Just want to make sure.
It's about 10 to, and I'm hoping that you're going to have enough time for some questions and answers, and to sell some books.
Right, I kind of got carried away. I'm just going to run through. This is Francois Morelli. It's called Home Cooked Meal. He bartered. He said, I'm here in southern France with my suitcase full of rubber stamps. If you like a wall painting, you can cook me a home meal. So it was a barter, and a lot of documentation of the meal and the menu and who was there. And so it became a social interaction. And he says really that in the end, it's just about, he said, we do all these things just to connect people in some kind of human way. This is Sharon Alward from Winnipeg. She deals also a lot with her past and with the whole Christian. She's like taking on the whole Christian establishment and questioning things. And here she put herself in these stocks for 10 days. And people started to come up to her and to talk to her and to cry and to confess things. It's sort of like Marina Abramovich, who was in the, I am here, or you are here. So she realized there's this power of the artist. It's sort of almost like a sacrificial stance. And so she did a lot of also social interaction. So it's about place, but it's about people connecting with you. I'll just finish the last chapter, talks about phenomenological elements of people who are just talking about the, again, the sound of the room. Or this was Annie Martin, who she's from Lethbridge. She moved to Lethbridge, which from
Montreal.
She was from Montreal, yeah, but she originally had grown up on the Gulf Islands in like a very kind of wild, back to the land place, which I found was interesting because, I was thinking, oh, that must be so wonderful. And she's like, no, it was great, but I left it and I don't have any regrets. And this is also interesting. And she just had all these objects on her studio ledge, and somehow the light at different times of the day coming in were reflected on the page, and then she got into a whole series of sort of indexical drawings of exactly what was happening at that moment. And this is in Montreal, where she does a lot of sound projects, which is bringing the sounds, the outside sounds, into the inside, very muffled. The last artist I talk about is Michael Fernandez, who's a very sort of conceptual artist of Ascad. And he's just like, I just arrive at a place, the daughter of the gallery owner told me I should, I don't know, pour paint on the floor, so I did. You know, sort of whatever happens at that moment, that's what I'm doing. In the Mocha show, he brought these arrows and he shot them at the walls, and in some places they stuck, and in some places they fell down. So that was the piece. So he doesn't need home. He doesn't want to talk about where he's from. He doesn't want me to even document him. So that's another radical thing. I'll just read you my conclusion, or not exactly a conclusion, but I'll read it from the book. It's not a conclusion, it's more just a way of summing up. Okay. As I uncovered the tenuous nature of any definition of home, the things I'd been searching for began to lose their power and their hold over me. And now at the end of this journey, I see that for me, home is no longer a predefined essentialist noun. There is no one solution, no definitive answer, no a priori solid home as a place at which to arrive or to which to return. Only temporary havens and more questions. As I looked into the lives and practices of others with the hope of understanding how they had created and experienced a place for themselves in the world, I have come to see how individual and how tentative all this are the solutions at which we each arrive. This situation that had so unnerved me at an earlier stage of my life and art career, the shifting parameters of home, the lack of deep attachment to place, no longer feel threatening, and finding a home has evolved from a practical quest to a guiding myth. I've come to understand that home and the sense of belonging to it can be created, literally or metaphorically, out of intentions and state of mind, or through practice by an artist or by anyone for that matter. The last line is, I talk about a work I did in Tel Aviv where I'm just walking back and forth and I'm comfortable, but I say, I could be almost anywhere. The whole world is and is not my home. Thank you. I know we left it really late, but if anyone has any quick questions or if you want to talk to me afterwards. Yes.
Well,
Hi.
when you were a young girl, were you surrounded by complex, interesting artists?
No.
When did you discover being in the world?
Right. Well, I talk about my first site-specific performance action, which was when I was a little girl in this very bland kind of suburban place in Toronto, and I was making these dams to like block the water going down the thing, and it's like that's what I remember. But that seemed like really powerful. Those experiences. You know, I did all kinds of other things, and I think my mother took me to the ballet or something. I don't remember that. I remember building a little wall, and my hands were freezing, and I would work, and so I realized that was somehow where I connected. I don't know if that's the answer, but.
I found it very interesting. If I think about your work and the talk that you just gave as a kind of an extended search for home.
Yeah.
When you were talking about this piece here, and I was kind of asking you, inappropriately perhaps, because I knew that you were resisting talking about, you know, the specific references and what that plant meant symbolically to Israelis and Palestinians. But, and I'm sure I was wrong. I heard, what was the name of the plant again? Sabra?
Sabras, yeah.
Sabras. So is that connected with the Sabra, like somebody who is from the place it is? Right. So that's why I thought that was quite significant. If you were using this particular plant that had that kind of symbolism that has very much to do with home, but you were like wanting to sort of not recognize that, or somehow jump over it. It seemed very interesting and very sort of contradictory to me. If you were in fact looking for home, but not, trying not to recognize those very site-specific things about the materials that you were working with, you were already kind of sort of mapping up, it was a kind of a modernist erasure of your materials, right?
Right. Well, that's a good point. I mean, I was aware of it, and I think in Israel particularly, because this, you know, the conflict is so like alive every moment. But you know, when I came back here, it turns out it was pretty alive here too. So it was less different than I had originally thought. I thought I'd be coming back to something more land-based and stuff, but it was also historical. But I think I felt that I didn't want to just connect to that narrative or who I was and who they were and this and that. I wanted to also sort of experience it on my own, sort of my own connection to the land. So it didn't just become this very heady thing. And, you know, there's artists in Israel who would say that that is impossible and whatever you're doing, and it is, anything I'm doing is political, but I find that some of the art that's just pure political is, it just, for me personally, it doesn't, I don't find it interesting, or it's too sort of ideological, or, you know, goes into one sort of stance and doesn't allow for more complex layering. So I was just, not consciously, but I was exploring how one could get around that problem, just being, you know, having an opinion. I mean, people just are endlessly talking and yelling and exploring and getting nowhere, really, like that. So I thought, I wonder if I could kind of get around that by just being in the place and figuring out, sort of, you know, almost like a child, like, with this plant, sort of looking at it. So yeah, but it's not, it's still very much in the context of that. That's problematic situation.
One thing I'm thinking of that I, to be honest, wasn't thinking of during your talk, but just now, is the idea of home is always being connected by almost all the artists, all of them really, to a physical place rather than people.
Well, I talked in the end, the sort of framework started very much with the physical place, like with Simon Frank in his backyard. And then Victoria was becoming more some kind of strategy, and then nomadic, and interacting with people became her form. And then Jackie Sawatsky is another artist who is really homeless. And she calls herself homeless, but she just moves between different places and doesn't have a home, and her site, her art is her home, and her website is her home. And then also Michael Fernandez, who says, doesn't matter, it's not relevant. So it moved like that. So yes, it started from very much home, and then became less and less like that. So it's not like wasn't like a hierarchy or anything. It's just, I was just sort of observing. And when you say about sort of not confronting maybe where you are, it's more finding that art, actually the best way, I think art is a good vehicle for containing complex things without coming up with answers. So you're showing or you're experiencing, but you're not saying this is therefore this is how it's going to be, or this is the answer. So for me personally, that's where I hang out in that zone. So, yeah.
If there are no more questions or comments, let's try to sell some books. Thank you very much.
Okay. Yes. So great.
The image sort of became like an alter ego for a while.